G'day everyone, Kate from Narrate Church here. As we celebrate Mother's Day this weekend, it opens up an interesting question. What wouldn't you know if it wasn't for your mother? In answer to this, Adam looks closer at 4 mother-child relationships from the Bible and shares some valuable findings.
Hi. Is it still snowing out there? So weird. Our Australian friend is so confused. It's May, you know? Yeah, exactly. It's summer. I said, well, don't worry. It's only snowed on June once since I lived here, so we're doing okay. Happy Mother's Day to all you moms and grandmoms, and to those of you that are neither, then happy May 11th. I guess that's what it is for you. We've been in this series called The Goat Has Left the Building, and this morning we're just going to kind of hit pause on that, though I think you'll see a connection if you've been tracking with us, because this morning we kind of have a tradition of making a lot of Mother's Day and Father's Day and always giving some kind of a gift, and this year it was a Mad Lib, and there's also a particular thread that I'd like to pull on this morning that I think it'll take you a while to figure out where we're going, but if nothing else, that keeps me entertained and hopefully not you too confused. And I guess for me, the win this morning would be that you'd leave as a parent with something to think about and to analyze, or even as a grandparent, and even if you're not an active parenter at this stage in life, that you would be processing failure and disappointment, maybe in a little bit healthier way as we kind of step into that conversation this morning. The way I'd like to start is to get you thinking about, were it not for your mom, what wouldn't you know? Because it's Mother's Day, right? And we're supposed to honor our mothers. And so as you think about your mom and her influence, what wouldn't you know if it wasn't for her? I've done this a little bit just to buy you some time. And the first thing that stood out to me was I get a lot of heat about where I get my haircut. I get teased a lot, but if it wasn't for my mom, I wouldn't know the value of a good haircut, which would mean I wouldn't get my haircut at Sugar, which means I wouldn't get teased by my friends so much. But it is awfully close to the office. The other thing about my mom is she worked in clothing retail as I was a kid, which means that we always had really nice clothes, or if they weren't nice, you were supposed to look nice, like not necessarily the peak of fashion, but I didn't wear jeans to school until I was in the 5th grade, and even then it was only on Fridays. My friend Jerry here is remembering me in my dorky green pants with my white and green striped shirts. In fact, I have one memory of riding home from school, and I was on 8th Avenue in these dumb cotton pants, you know, they were gigantic. I didn't have a chain guard on my bike, and my pants got stuck in my chain, and then I fell over, and I couldn't figure out how to get my pants out of my chain, and some elderly woman came out and helped me free myself. So were it not for my mom, I wouldn't value clothes, though I've had to temper that, because, you know, I mean, we could all spend our whole income on clothes, and so I like clothes, and you like clothes, and so I've just kind of had to trim it back a little bit. I was reminded this week that I'm getting old, and that I'm becoming like all the men that I know older than me, because I needed to buy a new pair of jeans. So you know what I did? I bought the exact same pair I bought the last 3 times I bought jeans. Like, why reinvent the wheel? I know that they fit as long as Levi cooperates and they don't ever come up with a new brand. I'm set for life. The other thing about it is if it wasn't for my mom, then that would mean I wouldn't iron every morning, because she was into looking nice. So that is not a joke. I iron t-shirts and pants, jeans every morning. I find it therapeutic because I see results. You start with something all messed up, and boom, it's perfect. If only life worked that way. The other thing about my mom is now, so the last 20 years, she's worked in furniture and design stuff, and so the other experience that I have that's fairly emasculating is that when people come over to my house and they compliment my wife on the interior decorating, she says, no, it's not me, it's my husband. But I am secure in my manhood. In all seriousness, one of the things I hope you're coming up with ideas as I make myself look like an imbecile, is that I do owe my love of reading to my mom, which is somewhat odd because neither her nor my dad are readers, but I have this distinct memory of being in 1st grade, and there was a competition to see who could read the most books, and I can't remember what the length of time was, but I remember the number. I remember sitting on the couch, or sitting on the floor in front of the couch with this stack of library books, and we read 99 books, and my mom won that competition at my expense. No, actually, I was grateful because I got to go to lunch with the prettiest single 1st grade teacher anybody had ever seen, Miss Nichols. And actually, this was the time when Laurel had, they had a real A&W, like not that gross knockoff thing that tastes like Albertsons. Like they had the, no offense if you work at Albertsons, but you know, I mean, A&W was once A&W. I mean, it was like In-N-Out Burger and A&W. I mean, they were one of the, but we had a real one. Remember this, Jerry? And they had like real mugs and real root beer floats, and it was good. So I was happy to win that competition. So what wouldn't you know? Were it not for your mom, what wouldn't you know? I've been watching a lot of baseball. My oldest is playing baseball. It's a weird thing, this parenting thing, right? Because I grew up when sports were everything, and I was pushed in sports, and so I get psychotherapy for that. And then so in response to that, like, I don't push my kids in sports at all. I think just when they take interest in it. And so my 10-year-old is like, hey, I want to play baseball this year. And now I watch him play, and I feel guilty because my dad worked with me so hard, and I just kind of went like, I'm not going to force you to do anything. Anyway, so I've been watching a lot of baseball and noted, as I was thinking about this, like, what would we not know if it wasn't for our mom? I just recognized very quickly, like, there's lots of things 10-year-old boys wouldn't know about baseball if it wasn't for their mom. Might be better off if they didn't, but like there was a gal this week, her poor son, because in 10 years old in baseball, there's 3 ways to get on base. You get hit by the pitch, or there's really 2 ways to get on base. You get hit by the pitch, you walk, or you strike out. Like, those are the 3 most common outcomes in 10-year-old baseball, because the hardest feat in sport is to hit a round ball with a round bat, right? We don't play baseball anymore, so none of us can appreciate that, but seriously, like, the people who are the best of the world at it, they're successful 3 out of 10 times. So these poor little kids, they're swinging the bat. There was this kid who he'd struck out a bunch, and I think he had a couple strikes on him, and his mom, I was standing close to her, she yelled, "Watch the ball all the way to the plate." Thanks, Mom. Like, thanks for clarifying the goal. There was another kid pitching, and that's tough too. And this kid had walked several kids in a row, and I heard his mom from the other side of the field, "Moms, just never say this to your poor son who's pitching." Her advice was, "Just throw strikes, Johnny. Just throw strikes." What the heck do you think he's trying to do? Like, give me a break. "Oh, thanks, Mom. I thought the goal was to walk everybody." "Oh, now that you say that, I'll just throw strikes." If only it were that simple, right? How about those of you dads? What would your kids not know if it wasn't for your wife, their mom? What would your grandkids not know if it wasn't for their grandma? For me, I was like, my kids, they wouldn't know that faster is always better than slower, and risk is always better than like safe, and adventure is always better than routine, because I represent one side of that equation, my wife the other. I'll let you predict which. The other thing is, my wife's, she's pretty easygoing and one of the least judgmental people I know. Like, so we balance each other out that way too. And but she can't handle hearing her kids say God, like name in vain type of stuff. It just bugs her, I think, because it's annoying when someone says your name, right? And like, especially if every mom in the room can relate to this. Mom, 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 mom. And there's no sentence that follows. It's like, what? So she has this thing with our kids that if they say God, but they're saying it like most people say God, then they have to pray for the day. And so they'll say it, and she'll go pray for the day, and they'll go, "God, thank you for the day." So this week, she was out of town, and I was a soccer mom this week. And we were getting out of the Suburban, and one of the boys said, "God." And he wasn't praying. And yes, he's a PK, but my kids are broken too, and so am I, and more so than most of you. And he said, "God," and I saw him look out of the corner of his eye like, does Dad play this game too? It's really fantastic. How about this? Here's really where I want to go. What's the most important thing? What's the most important thing to teach your kids? Now, I know that's a fairly arrogant question, if not minimizing, but it's kind of the direction that I'd like to flow a little bit this morning of what's the most important thing to teach your kids? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, because as a parent, the areas where you have to win, they're myriad. There's way too many. What's the one thing? Dr. Cloud, who we talk about a lot around here, he's a therapist and a psychiatrist who also follows Jesus, and so he's making an incredible impact in our world, because to his psychiatry friends, what he's saying is science and the Bible are friends, that what therapists understand and what the text and God has been saying through his people for thousands of years, like they complement each other. And yet to Christ-following circles, what Dr. Cloud is accomplishing is he's saying to Christ followers, hey, sometimes getting well isn't pray a prayer, memorize a verse, and like go do the right thing. Sometimes it's bigger than that. We got to dig deeper than that. So I was at a teaching of his here a couple of months ago. I've talked a lot about this. And at one point he told a story of a dinner party that he attended. So he's more amongst peers and friends than he was kind of in this professional conference setting. And he said he was in the kitchen, I believe, and this woman came up to him and said, Henry, that's his first name, Henry, what's the most important thing for me to teach my son? What's the most important thing? And he said instantly he had the answer. He's thought a lot about this through his clinical work and other work. He's formulated a really strong conviction. But as he looked at her and as he was forming his specific words in this case, he could tell that what she was expecting was kind of one of those banner character words like integrity or humility or self-sacrifice, something along those lines. And it's not actually what he had in mind. What would you say? You're a parent, or maybe you're not a parent. If you're not a parent, maybe you have a job. Maybe you're a student, you have roommates, you have teammates. Think of it this way. If you could organize things so that every person in your life, every person you let into your life had one particular skill, what would you want it to be? Maybe you manage a team. Maybe you're pulling in different workers from different spheres and different sectors and different industries. If every sub you hired had one particular character trait, what would you want it to be? Every salesman on your team, every doctor in your office, every friend that you might have, what would you want it to be? Maybe you're a grandparent. And one of the, it seems to me, advantages of being a grandparent is that you can feed your kids sugar and not have to pay the consequences. That's one. The other is you've been there. You've done the parenting gig. You have some perspective. As you watch your grandkids get parented, what's the one thing you hope that your grandkids leave the house with? I mean, I was thinking about it this week, like if you could take Harry Potter's wand and program it so that every person that you pointed at had one particular character trait, what would you want that character trait to be? Particularly if you were going to work with them, if you're going to try to accomplish something with them, if you desired for them to be successful. What would you want it to be? See, as I was thinking about Mother's Day and thinking about like celebrating and honoring our parents, which is, like, see, one of the unique things about parenting is the power structure changes, right? There's a season where you have all of it, and there's a season when you have none of it. And so the reason the text talks so much about honoring your parents is, as adults, we don't have to. We have all the power now. But I was just struck by how these great men and women of the text were so deeply influenced by what they'd learned from their mom. Like, I think of Isaac and what his mom Sarah must have taught him. See, Isaac, if you're not familiar with the narratives of Scripture, Isaac was the son of Abraham. Abraham was the one that God said, hey, go lead my people. And Isaac had this remarkable faith in God. This not simplistic, but very simple, that sounded contradictory, but you know what I mean, right? Like it wasn't this like spiritualized thing, but he had this authentic belief that God wanted to know his concerns and that oftentimes he would grant his requests. And Isaac was in this situation as a 30-something, perhaps, as an adult, where he and his wife Rebekah, they were in the prime childbearing years. And yet they were experiencing what continues to be one of the most horrifying, emotionally traumatizing things for people to experience, and that was they couldn't have kids. And listen, maybe you're experiencing this. Maybe you know somebody. I certainly know some people. And what we know is that there's few things that are more emotionally exhausting than a woman, than a couple who desperately wants kids and can't have them. And I don't have a simple answer for that other than to say I empathize with you. That was Rebekah's situation. And yet her situation was even more complicated, I would suggest, at the risk of trivializing yours, than your situation, because in her day, the inability to have children, first of all, there were no scientific explanations. Second of all, it was always assumed that if a couple couldn't have kids, it was her problem. Now we understand that science would say, no, sometimes he has something to do with that as well. And not only that, it was a profoundly spiritual thing for them. The thinking in that day, and for the vast majority of human history, was that if you couldn't have kids, then God was somehow punishing you for some unspoken, uncommunicated, unconfessed sin. And so Rebekah, you can just imagine she's your daughter, your friend. She has this authentic faith and trust in God, and she so desperately wants kids, and she can't. And when she walks the streets and when she goes to the market and when she goes to religious services, when she worships, the assumption is she's broken beyond repair and God is spiting her. And people are whispering like, yeah, God's spiting her. Something's wrong with her. If she just swallow her pride and stop sinning, she could have kids. Imagine the social impact she carried. As if that weren't enough, there were also profound economic implications. We have Social Security. at least for a while. We have retirement accounts. We have things of those nature. Like we all understand, and the older we get, the more we understand this, that someday our knees and our hips and our shoulders are going to be gone, and we're not going to be able to produce at the level that we are, and so we're going to have a plan. The plan in their culture was kids. They farmed. They ate what they grew. They lived season to season, day to day. If you had any extra of what you grew, that's what you could have variety with because you could barter and trade. Which means Rebekah, not only did she have the humiliation of not having children, not only did she have the disappointment of that, not only did she have the spiritual shame of that, but when she tried to project out into the future, she couldn't figure out how she was even going to eat when she got old because she wouldn't have kids to provide for her. And yeah, that would be the man's situation too, but the man had an out. See, men could just have multiple wives, and though that wasn't God's best, it was common. And so he, very easily, Isaac could have just went and got a bunch of other wives, and he would have had kids, and he would have been set. But she's at the mercy of those other women's kids. Just imagine the weight of that. And as though that weren't complicated enough, what if he died before her? I mean, to be an old couple without kids, that's precarious. To be a woman without kids, beyond beyond her youth, that's terrifying. What I love about Isaac and what I think Isaac learned from Sarah, well, let's just listen to what Isaac did in the midst of all that tension. In Genesis 25, we're told this remarkable story, and it's just so straightforward. It says, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. You just feel the compassion. He didn't have to do that. He was fine. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's that simple. But can you feel the situation? Now, here's what's incredible to me as we think about mothers and their influence on our lives. See, Isaac, I think, learned this from his mom, Sarah. Because Sarah and Abraham, Isaac's parents, they were in the same situation. They too couldn't have kids, and yet Sarah didn't navigate the tension as well as Rebekah did. What Sarah said to Abraham was, hey, go sleep with one of my maidservants, and they'll have a kid, and then we'll raise him as though they're our own, and everything will be fine, and no one will know the difference anyway. And that blew up in Sarah's face. And by the time they solved that problem, Sarah was still hopeless, and years later, the angel of God showed up to Abraham and said, hey, Sarah's going to have a kid, and he's like, she's 10,000 years old. She's going to have a kid. And you know what Sarah did? She laughed, and then she had a kid. And I can't help but wonder if that moment didn't form in Sarah this deep conviction that God can. And if as a little boy, over and over and over, what Sarah impressed upon Isaac was, hey, Isaac, don't ever feel like you have to compromise. Don't ever feel like the only way to get God's results is to do it somebody else's way. Don't ever take shortcuts. Don't ever think that God at least doesn't want to hear the request. I think of Samuel. You know, Samuel, there aren't that many heroes in the text that aren't just broken beyond broken. And that's part of what makes the text so accessible is you read about these people and they go, hey, they're screwed up. Sweet, I'm in good company. But Samuel's almost one of the exceptions to that. Listen, if you've never read his story, or if you're trying to figure out where to read in your Bible, or you're kind of in this kind of wall and you don't know what to read, or maybe you've never read the text, you think it's just a bunch of do's and don'ts, like swing by Guest Central, get a free Bible, and go to 1 Samuel and read the narrative of Samuel. It's brilliant because he was this incredibly grounded but unpretentious dude. In fact, Samuel played a very vital role in the history of God's people of kind of turning them away from the corruption of the establishment back to the heart of God. But to understand Samuel, you have to understand his mom. Because Samuel's mom was a woman named Hannah. Hannah was another woman that wasn't able to have kids. Hannah was in a marriage where her husband had multiple wives. And every year they would go do this festival thing and they would offer sacrifices. And the other wife, she would mock Hannah, make fun of Hannah because Hannah didn't have any kids. And the text describes what I think today would be understood as like clinical depression. Hannah would stop eating. She would stop engaging in relationship at all, and she would just go completely inward, completely closed off. She was hopeless. And then Hannah one day decided she could do something. And the first part of that story, I'm serious, like Samuel is one of my very favorite Old Testament characters. Listen to this. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. She made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. Remember, she was accused of being drunk. She was so emotional in this experience. And eventually she did have a son. In an act of complete selflessness, listen, think of all the reasons why she needed a son, and yet the moment she could, the moment he was weaned, the text says, she gave Samuel back to Eli. And Samuel, as you read his story, was so profoundly dedicated to his God, and I can't help but think that he learned that from his mom. Or I think of Jesus, the man who was God and man, who defines what it means to be self-sacrificing, a man who went to the cross, and yet the man who, I think if our theology is on par with the New Testament, we understand he was fully God, but he was also fully human, which means he had to learn some things. And the biggest thing he would have to know how to do is what? He'd have to go to the cross, literally put himself before everyone else. And when I ask, how did he do that? You quickly are reminded that his mother was a woman named Mary, who was a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl who had her whole life in front of her, was engaged to her dreamboat, and God showed up in her room and said, hey, Mary, I've got an idea. How about you become pregnant, and then you tell all your friends that you didn't have sex with anybody? And Mary goes, what? And oh yeah, you're going to have to go tell your fiance that you're pregnant, and when he goes, that's a bummer, you're going to have to say, no, actually it's not, because God made me pregnant, so we're still good. And then there's this thing that's going to happen for the rest of your life when you walk the streets. People are going to whisper, whore, liar. But Mary, as we've talked about over the course of the last few years, I think Mary leapt at the opportunity. She understood, you see it in her song, she understood the invitation of God. She said yes to an opportunity that most people would have said no to, but it didn't come without cost. And ultimately, Mary would have the ultimate cost, because she would experience the thing that every parent in this room dreads more than anything else. She would watch her son die before she did. And not only would he die, she would have to watch. And not only would she have to watch, he would be innocent. Not only was he innocent, he wasn't just dying, he was tortured. And you watch that man hang on the cross, and you can't help but ask yourself, man, God, did you need Mary to teach him that kind of self-sacrifice? So let me ask you this. What is it that your kids, what is it that they're only going to know because of you? And if you had to boil it down to one thing, what's the one thing you'd want them to know? To be successful, to thrive in life, to be the kinds of community members and volunteers and Christ followers and business leaders. What's the one thing that you'd need them to know? See, here's the thing. I'll bet you personally have it. If you've experienced any level of success relationally in your marriage, in your work, you know this. The question is, have you taught it to your kids? You know what Dr. Cloud said? Man, when he said this, I was immediately like, I don't have a sackcloth, so I didn't know how to get into one, but that's what I was feeling like. I am a failure. I have missed this thing. When he said it, do we have a mic to mute maybe? When Dr. Cloud said this, I was blown away. And what I realized was my whole understanding of leadership was backwards. See, I think of leadership as a person who gets results. I think that leaders are people who they have a goal and they accomplish the goal. And what I realized that that's true to an extent, but the means by which that happens, I've completely misunderstood. And as I've just thought about parenting, and listen, I'm way less experienced at it than most of you, so please don't hear me arrogantly saying I got this figured out. But where it's really struck me is as I've watched my kids play sports and as I've thought about my own experience with sports. Let me ask you this. Why do you want your kids playing sports? What's the value of that? And maybe you're going my kids don't play sports, I don't like sports. Okay, so art, music, whatever it is, theater. Why is it that we so value our kids being involved in extracurricular activities? What is that? Because if you don't think about it, what culture will say is it's about identity. It's about finding a way to matter. It's about somehow connecting the idea that you're worth something. But why? What's the value of sports? Why do you really want them playing sports? We invest a lot of money. In fact, this is somewhat cynical, but my friend Fred, I was unpacking with him a couple years ago from the parent perspective, because, you can spend $100,000 on traveling teams and camps and all that stuff over the course of raising your kids, and so I was asking Fred, what do I do with this? And he said, well, Adam, most parents do all that in the name of their kids getting a scholarship. He said, that's bogus. In fact, if it's really about the scholarship, it'd be a lot better investment to stick the money in the bank and give it to them for college, because there'll be more than they're going to get in any supposed scholarship. And that's a really good point. So why? Let me ask you this, is it so they hit a lot of home runs? Is that the value of sports? I was watching the game earlier this week, and there was this kid, he was up to bat, and he had 2 strikes on him, and the third pitch was a strike, and he didn't swing, and he struck out. And that's what's funny. Some of these 10-year-olds ball their brains out, and some of them are like, squirrel, like they don't even care. And so this kid's walking back to the dugout, and he's invested, like he cares, but he was fine. He's walking back to the dugout, and one of the dads who was kind of helping the coach, and his coach does a really good job, one of the dads scooted up next to him, and so he kind of got next to him like this, and as they were walking back to the dugout, they were walking right towards me, and I listened to this dad, and he leaned over, and you know what he said to the kid? He said, don't worry about it. It wasn't a strike anyway. And I thought, really? Like, is that the value of sports, is so that we have more people who enter the workforce and the adult world thinking everyone's out to screw them and all that their job is to point it out when it happens? Is that the value? What is it? Listen, here's what Dr. Cloud said. Dr. Cloud said to this woman, he said, teach your child to lose. And her jaw dropped. And he said, they're going to lose. And the best thing you could do for them is teach them how to lose. What if the business leaders in this room who are successful, what if those of you who are in relationships that are successful, what if the degree to which you've experienced success, is it because you've never failed? Or is it because you've learned how to thrive through it? Is the reason why you can get up in the morning because you're still experiencing disappointment because you've never experienced it, or because you've learned how to push through it? What if winners aren't people who don't lose? What if they're people who lose better? See, Dr. Cloud, he went on to say this, and I just wanted you to have this quote directly. He says, losing well with the ability to continue on is one of the most important character traits you can teach your child. See, when we back away from the culture and sports and activities and all that, wouldn't we go, oh yeah. I say to my kids almost every time we leave the field, not because I'm such a perfect dad, but because I have this perspective, because I was the kid who was fully convinced I could play for the St. Louis Cardinals, and I say, listen, nobody on that field's playing college baseball. So let's just keep it all in perspective. Andy Stanley talks about the importance of parenting the first name, not the last name. He says when we parent the last name, it's really about us. When we parent the first name, it's about them. What if losing is a quality we have to learn to thrive? And here I think of John the Baptist and John the Baptist and his mom. See, John the Baptist, everybody in this room can relate on some level, because John the Baptist was at one point young, he was at one point successful, he was at one point the doctor or the builder or the whoever that everybody wanted to employ. He was the thing. Everyone was listening to his podcast, reading his books. He was on Oprah. He was the guy. And you know what happened? Eventually he wasn't the guy anymore. And his guys, they started following another guy. And pretty soon all the buzz wasn't his work. It wasn't the things he built. It wasn't the things he sold. It wasn't the way he did things. It was the way somebody else did things. And his guys came to John, and I just love what John said to them. It's found in the Gospel of John. John said that a person can receive only what is given him from heaven. I've got this in perspective, he says. I was only winning by the grace of God. You yourselves can testify that I said I am not the Messiah, but am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, it's now complete. He's going, listen. I know how to lose. And then he finishes this way. I love this line. He must become greater. I must become less. I can't help but think that the guy who was going to pave the way for Jesus was going to have to be a guy who was going to know how to lose, and how appropriate it is that person would come from Elizabeth. Because Elizabeth was the daughter of a priest, married to a priest. They didn't have the option of multiple wives and all of that stuff. They had to walk this very straight and narrow path, and they endured a lifetime of not having kids. A lifetime of disappointment, a lifetime of pain. And by the grace of God, they had a kid at their end of their life. And can't you just picture Elizabeth with her hand around John going, hey, you struck out. But it's not about whether or not you got a hit or struck out. It's about, are you going to go bad again? Are you going to try harder next time? Are you going to define life by never failing? Can't you just picture her coaching John through the realities of disappointment? You know, one of the things that I find fascinating about Cloud's work is that he talks about this idea that there was about 80 years of clinical psychology where they studied why people weren't well. And then around the mid-'80s, what they realized was they had been studying why people weren't well, but they hadn't studied what makes happy people happy. And so there was about a 20-year burst of intense research on what are the skills of people who do enjoy life. And what he found was one of the major determiners of whether or not someone's healthy is how someone deals with failure. In fact, what he said is, a person who is unhappy almost always handles failure this way. He says, unhappy people, first of all, they personalize failure. What that means is when they don't get the job, they got the interview, not the job. When they throw up the wall and it's crooked, when they give the wrong diagnosis, when they try to make the sales pitch and it doesn't work out, when they put in the bid and they don't get the project, what unhappy people do is they personalize it. And rather than saying, I didn't get that one, they say, I'm a failure. It becomes an identity thing. The second thing he said is that these are all P's, so I don't know what that's worth. The other one is, he says it's always pervasive. That unhappy people, the way they deal with failure is, first of all, they personalize it, and then they universalize it. So it moves from, I didn't get the job, that project didn't work out, I didn't get the second date, to everything I do is a failure. They lose what Dr. Cloud says, they lose their sense of objectivity. They no longer can kind of just see that one failure in isolation. And the third thing is they see their failure as permanent. I'll never get a job. I'll never meet somebody. I'll never be successful in a sales pitch. Isn't that fascinating? That what clinical psychology would say is, hey, you need to know how to lose. Why? Well, couldn't we say that, wouldn't you say from your life and your experience that reality is the place where things don't always work out? And what defines people who are good in your field versus not, the people who are content, the people who have good marriages aren't the ones who meet the perfect person, but the ones who understand how to get back up and keep working after they fail. See, really, we could localize what's wrong with the world into three things. This too, I'm stealing. Everything I do, I steal. Just so you know. Three things they say is broken. This really helped me when I heard this. You're broken. You or the self. Others are broken. And the world is broken. So when you fail, and you're the reason why, what do? You say, well, it wasn't a strike anyway. No. You say, the umpire's 13 years old, his strike zone's been terrible the whole game. I should have swung the bat. That's what you do. You own it. You confess it. You repent of it. What do you do when other people fail? You say, oh, another imperfect person that I need to eliminate from my life. No. You know what? One of the most common things that I hear from people who are stuck in their brokenness in my conversations, you know, one of the most common twisted notions in our heads is when we get here, I just think we're just hosed. Time and time again, I meet with people who are surprised that someone hurt them. And I love to say to those people, you realize that every person that you ever have a relationship with is going to hurt you at some point, right? It's just, other people are going to hurt you. And so what do you do when other people hurt you? You grieve it. Now, we have this profound disadvantage. In the Jewish culture, they hired professionals to come help us grieve. We're not good grievers. We say like, oh, he died, that's too bad. Where's my beer? But you have to grieve when other people hurt you. And then you have to forgive. And the third part is, and you know this, that's why your business is successful. It's why you still have a marriage. It's why you're still walking. The world's broken. You may or may not believe in the Bible. You may or not believe that Jesus is who he says he is, but you agree with this general idea that the world is broken, that things aren't right. And what the scriptures would say is you were intended for Eden. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But there's lots of things like earthquakes and tornadoes and all kinds of other things that you don't have control over. So reality says, hey, prepare yourself for disappointment, right? What if we were the types of people who taught our kids how to lose and how to be good at it. Now, listen, I'm not saying this from a pretentious, like, you should do what I do. Please don't hear that. I'm with you in this, terrified by the responsibilities I have as a parent, just as you are. What if as people, as you navigate your field and try to figure out how you're going to grow as a person, as you're going to grow as a professional, what if you just commit yourself to learning how to lose? You know, Dr. Cloud, one question that I think naturally follows is, okay, so how do I teach my kids this? He suggests a game. He says he plays this game with his kids every night over dinner. Whenever someone is that perfect of a parent, I assume that they're not that much more perfect than I am and that he's generalizing. But I do try to play this game with my kids a couple nights a week over dinner. He calls it Roses and Thorns. Go ahead, next slide. It's this game. No, we can have that next one. Oh, okay. It's this game that he plays where every night over dinner, he asks his kids 2 questions. This is so simple. What went well? What was broken? What went well? What went terrible? What are the roses? That's probably better for girls. You've got to come up with something for boys. It's not quite so, I don't know, sorry. Roses and thorns. What were the good things? What were the bad things? Now, y'all kind of go like, okay, that makes sense. Like, let's just talk openly about life. He says, no. The value of that, here's what he says is the value of that. The value of that is, he said, you want your kids to leave the house fully aware that nothing in life is ever all good and nothing in life is ever all bad. We have a clinical diagnosis for people who live that way. It's called being bipolar, right? And sometimes that's genetic and unavoidable, and sometimes it's a habit of our thinking. He says, we should want our kids to live in this very clear sense that sometimes a friendship is in really good order and I flunked a spelling test, and that's life. And I have to learn how to emotionally thrive through life that way. We do it as a staff. I didn't realize it until he'd said this. One of our practices every Thursday, we do a weekly review meeting and we sit together and we've all taken notes and we go through this thing of, okay, so what went well this week and what's broken? It's an exercise in making sure that we're aware of our successes and encouraged, and at the same time humbled and going, listen, we've far from arrived. I think it's an incredible tool for your kids. And it might be an incredible tool for you in your solitude, in your silence, on your drive home from work, when you're in the pit of despair, when you're on the mountaintop, to just get real and go, okay, so what is going well and what is going poorly? You know, I can't help but think that Jesus, one of the last things he said to his guys before he was arrested, it draws this whole reality of failure in. It's in this section that he's about to be arrested, and he gives this long speech to his guys. And he kind of summarizes the last 3 years that they've experienced with him. He says this, I've told these things so that in me you may have peace. See, first and foremost, what he's saying is if you're going to pin your sense of happiness to something, pin it to me. And then he goes on to say, in this world you will have trouble. And that's not the Jesus that shows up on coffee mugs and billboards and where are you going? Like, in this world you'll have trouble. Jesus. Like, it's not all that inspiring. But it kind of is because he's realistic. Life is going to be brutal. You're not going to pray for Jesus to be your Savior and suddenly you're going to have everything work out for you. That's not the story. He says there's going to be trouble. You're going to cause yourself trouble. Other people are going to cause you trouble. And this broken world that's not supposed to be this way is going to cause you trouble. But take heart. I've overcome the world. Your pain, your frustration, your disappointment, your anger, death, divorce, the inability to have kids, it doesn't get the last word. See, to walk with Jesus, to have relationship with Jesus, is to say to the God of the universe, God, thank you for drawing near to me. Thanks for removing my sin. The goat has left the building. Who I am is defined by the cross. And thank you, God, that you're there to walk with me through my winning and my losing.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.